But if I can show up with my humility and be transparent about my self-doubt and where I'm feeling a bit shaky here, guys, I don't know the answer to this one. I don't know the right path, or I've just made a mess of something, guys. Like if I need to be transparent where I've made mistakes, that's the superpower, not the confidence. And yet they're reliant. The two polarities, I think, support each other.
Welcome to Safe Space Made Simple, a practical podcast that guides clinical leaders and healthcare managers to create trust and support with their teams. I'm your host, Trace Hobson. Join me for weekly interviews, practical tools, and inspiring transformational stories of bringing people together in healthcare. Now, let's dive in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Safe Space Made Simple. My name is Trace Hobson. I'm your host, and this podcast is made for clinical leaders, managers, and executives who want to generate a safe space for themselves and for their teams. The whole idea is that we are sharing skills here that will help you to reduce burnout and increase retention, not just for your team, but also for you, and give you longevity in your career. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to share an interview that I just completed with Sarah Crawford-Bohl. Sarah is a healthcare executive and has been for almost 25 years here in British Columbia. She's a TEDx speaker and also a very passionate leader when it comes to creating relational equity with her teams. Sarah also shares a 4-step process that comes from her TEDx talk that will be released in approximately 1 or 2 months. And this 4-step process invites people to come to the table in a way that is attractive and helps people to have difficult conversations. I know this conversation and interview is going to support you in your leadership. So without further ado, let's get right into the show. Sarah, I'm so excited to have you join the show today. Welcome to Safe Space Made Simple. To begin with, it would be great if we could just hear a little bit about the work that you're doing in the world and really what's got you excited about your work right now.
Thanks, Trace. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm really honored and excited to be here. Let's see. So I'm an executive director with the local health authority here on Vancouver Island. We are called Island Health. And so my role is really supporting clinical operations in the South Island. It's Southern Gulf Islands, the clinical operations in that space. And I also have a strategic role that supports primary care across the region. So the operational side is a combination of acute care, hospitals, community health services, long-term care, and primary care. And let's see. Okay. Your follow-up question. What am I excited about? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
so many things. I think that probably the biggest one is being a part of such meaningful work. You know, we've just come out of a pretty incredible pandemic, but coupled with that are several other big challenges that we're facing, specifically a human resource challenge. We know that we're lacking in physicians and nurses and allied healthcare providers. And so we have to be creative in how we deliver care, because the care needs for our population seem to be growing, not diminishing in any way. And the complexities of our population are changing. The complexities I think are increasing. We've got an aging population. The people are needing more care than ever before. We have a toxic drug supply crisis that is incredibly complex. We have, I think that there are changes happening so quickly, not just technology changes, because you're hearing about AI and all of these things. Obviously, that's a factor for healthcare as it is for every industry. But the complexities of increasingly rapid cycles of change make it tough for people to not only continue to grow and learn, but to adapt and maintain resiliency through all of that change. So I'm very excited to have the opportunity to support people who are going through those types of changes and to try and help make sure that we're able to not only keep people happy and healthy in their roles, but also to continue to provide amazing care to the populations we serve.
Hmm. So if you look at healthcare right now, one of the things that really strikes me is that burnout is high and retention is low. That's sort of the two, metrics that we're looking at over and over again. And you mentioned it here with the healthcare crisis that's going on around human resources. I'm curious because as I look at your longevity in the field, you've been around for quite a while. And as an executive leader, what are some of the things that you're doing to maintain your own self-care and resilience as a leader?
Ooh, complex question, Trace. There's lots of things to that one.
Buckle up, Sarah. We're going to go
Here we
somewhere
go.
with this.
Yeah. Well, I firmly believe we have to put our own oxygen masks on first, and
Hmm.
that's not always easy. I think
Hmm.
a lot of healthcare providers get into the field to provide care and support to others, and so the natural tendency is to focus outside, right? To focus on other people versus saying, "Hold on, I actually need to look after myself." And what does that mean? How do I achieve that? And I think that changes over the course of our lifetime. You mentioned I've been in healthcare leadership for a couple of decades now, and when I started in healthcare leadership, I was, dating my now husband. We didn't have kids. We could, travel and take time off, and we didn't have a mortgage. Like all those things, life was a bit more simple then. And as you know, having daughters yourself, now we've got two daughters, we've got a mortgage, we've got aging parents, we've got,
Hmm.
friends and that we want to maintain relationships with. I'm perimenopausal, Trace. That adds extreme complexity. Um,
I have no comment on that.
no comment. We don't have to dive into
My
it.
wife
That's
has
the
taught me
next.
well. I'm just listen. I do a lot of listening.
Yeah, that's the next talk. Yeah. The next podcast. But so I think that it's something I've learned is to be adaptive and to listen to
Mm.
myself and to follow what my body is telling me and what my
Hmm.
mind is telling me. And that can come with some trials and tribulations. I need to
Of
learn.
course.
I need to talk to people who are going through things that I'm going through. And I'm finding that harder and harder to find
Hmm.
people who are experiencing something similar to me. And so it's a lot of diving in, but things that are really important. I think the balance is really important, and gosh, it's so hard to achieve. But when I think about, I spend quite a bit of time focusing on some of the standards: sleep, diet, exercise.
Hmm.
I prioritize those things more than ever before.
Hmm.
The late evenings going out to movies or activities with people. I am in bed by 9:30, Trace. Like
Good for you.
I gotta
That's
be there.
amazing.
And I have to prioritize getting up and getting the exercise in the morning because the evenings just
Hmm.
carry on. We've got kids' activities, and the workday doesn't seem to end at, never ends at 4, let's be honest. So I've
Hmm.
got to figure out if I'm going to fit those things in, it's got to be first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then diet as well. I try and be careful with things like alcohol, caffeine, all that jazz, very much in moderation to try and make sure that I can get the deep sleep and deep rest that I need to. And something taken a little bit more time into recently is meditation and
Hmm.
mindfulness exercises, which I think are highly underrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely a lot of effort into taking those mindful moments to shut off, focus on my breath, and even following things like meditation tapes or self hypnosis, things like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, you're kind of taking some of the tools out of my bucket because I subscribe to all that you've just mentioned. I'm probably not as good at the eating part. I probably
It's hard
eat
for all of
too
us.
much sugar sometimes. That's probably my guilty pleasure. But um, to your point about meditation and mindfulness and slowing down, that has become a lifeline. It's one of those things that I have to do. Otherwise, I suffer the consequences of not having it there for sure.
Mm.
Incapacity and just being able to navigate all the complexity that you mentioned with relationships and people and challenges. Aging parents. I also have aging parents as well, and we're just moving into a house that will equip. Having my parents downstairs in a suite, and my wife and I will be upstairs, and we took that step. That has a whole set of, complexities added to life. And then of course you go to work and you're navigating everything that's going on there as well. And when I think about what's going on in healthcare today, I guess what I'm curious about, Sarah, that I'd love your perspective on is there's these big sort of roles that we have in healthcare. If you start at the front line, in at point of care, then you come back to the clinical leadership team, the patient care coordinators, and the clinical nurse educators that are supporting and coordinating. And then you come back another step. You've got the manager that's there, then the director, and then the ED or the executive director. One of the things that I've noticed is that there's these big gaps between those major roles, and oftentimes those gaps can feel pretty big for each of those stakeholders. I'm wondering what you suggest or what you can share that you've learned over the years that helps us to fill those gaps with something so that people feel like they're on the same team, even though they might be far removed from some of those roles.
Ooh, yeah, good question. I think one of the toughest lessons, well, actually there's a number of them, but let's two at the top five. One is an area I know is really close to your heart, and that's around psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to create psychological safety for others is a big focus of leadership these days. But what I've found is that we're not always going to find ourselves in a place where we feel psychologically safe.
Right.
And as a new leader, you come in, I've come in with imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm not equipped. I don't have the skills. I don't have the tools in my tool belt. Other people are better than me. They should be in my spot. I'm not worthy. Like all of those thoughts have raced through my mind. And it's great when people around me are creating a safe place for me to learn and grow. Mentors, coaches, paid coaches or informal coaches, paid mentors or informal mentors. Those are really helpful. But when the psychological safety isn't present, because again, it's often my own perception of whether it's that the perception of psychological safety lies with me.
Right.
And if there isn't that real effort by others to create that space, what can I do about it? And so one of my biggest lessons as a leader is how I create that space for myself, and how do I come to the table, even though I feel the imposter syndrome, or even though I feel a threat is at play. The person I'm with is got judgment or isn't happy with me, or whatever it is that's going through my mind. How do I create that safe space? So I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about what gets me to the table. Things like compassion, knowing that I have to have compassion for myself. Number one, oxygen mask on first, compassion for myself. I'm a learner.
Right.
I'm new at this leadership gig. I'm with other people who have more experience, more age, more whatever tools in their tool belt than I do at this new leadership stage. And even as an experienced leader, I have to remind myself of that. I am meant to be here. I can stand strong in my power and hold my position, hold my place in this world, in this organization, and trust in myself, my intention, even though I might make a mess of it sometimes, Trace. So I think it's creating our own sense of psychological safety. And in doing that, amazingly, I think it helps to create that psychological safety for others. The people that report to us, the people we work with, and even the people above us. Does that resonate? How does that land?
I love what you're sharing on a couple of different levels. First of all, what you're saying about, so first of all, I want to acknowledge that you're openly talking about the inner dialogue that we all have going on inside of us, and you're actually saying that's thank you for sharing that, because that's the truth for all of us. It doesn't matter whether you're a frontline nurse or doctor, if you're a clinical leader, a manager, a director, or an ED. All of us are human beings, and we all have that sense of doubt at times about whether or not we're going to be able to measure up. Imposter syndrome, you said it, right? So then there's also this other idea of fear of other people's opinions and what they're going to think and say and do. And so generating a safe space is something that I believe each person has responsibility to do. I can't make anybody feel safe, but what I can do is take responsibility for my own self-regulation. I can not just talk about psychological health and safety or top-down safety, but I can talk about neurobiological safety and bottom-up safety as well. And so I think that's what you're alluding to a little bit. I especially like the work of Stephen Porges's work on polyvagal safety,
Oh,
or
got it.
polyvagal theory. I think that he adds an element to psychological health and safety that is a little deeper, that feels really resonant. So I really appreciate what you're sharing, and that makes me wonder, what are some of the skills and tools that leaders need to develop to be able to go into those conversations or situations that are going to be dysregulating and not easy? What would you suggest to leaders? What do you use, and what would you suggest?
Oh, thank you. Um, as a leader, tell me if this resonates for you, Trace, but it's
Sure.
a balance, the polarities, if you will, holding in balance humility and confidence.
Hmm.
So tough. And as a leader, if I show up with one heavier than than the other, my resiliency will be low.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
impact will not be as strong. And yet we seem to focus a lot of our I guess maybe speaking for myself, and in my early days, is like, oh, I got to show up confident, fake it till I make it,
Right.
which I still do believe in a little bit. Not a little bit. I believe a lot that sometimes
Yeah.
you gotta like go in there and put your body in a confidence, maybe not with crossed arms, but my power pose, right, in order to
Right.
force myself to feel confident in a situation where I don't. But so confidence is a key element that I've worked hard to develop.
Hmm.
But at the same time, the humility, which is probably that more of that inner dialogue, like, oh gosh, the insecurities, the lack of confidence, the lack of
Hmm.
courage, whoo, they're strong there. And yet, if I can lean in and demonstrate that vulnerability and show that I'm feeling it, I don't have to put my armor on and show up with that confidence all the time. But if I can show up with my humility and be transparent about my self doubt and where I'm feeling a bit shaky here, guys, I don't know the answer to this one. I don't know the right path, or I've just made a mess of something, guys. Like if I need to be transparent where I've made mistakes, that's the superpower,
Hmm.
not the confidence.
Hmm.
And yet they're reliant. The two polarities, I think, support each other, that
Hmm.
the more I'm transparent and vulnerable outwardly, the more I feel courageous and confident.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think that being vulnerable appropriately and contextually is so important. I also think the unlock you're talking about with is awareness. Like when you're aware of the multidimensionality of being a human being, like I can go into a situation and I'm going to have compassion, and I'm also going to be holding some judgment as well, and I'm going to have some pretty strong ideas or even activations or reactions about what's going on. And it's not about whether or not that's going to happen. It's about whether or not I'm aware of it and I'm willing to hold space for myself to just hold all of it, like to
Mhm.
just keep holding it and being honest and open and willing with that. So much can happen after that. Otherwise, if I'm kind of just locked in to one position or another. It's very binary. So I appreciate what you're saying about that. Hey, just a quick pause to today's podcast. Are you having a challenge as a clinical leader with one or more individuals who you find activate you on your team? Or maybe you're noticing that oftentimes you want to be able to communicate with people, but in the heat of the moment, it's difficult for you because you're having a difficult time regulating yourself. Well, I totally understand this. This has been some of the biggest challenges in my life as a leader and as a human being. And so I created a free resource for clinical leaders, nurse educators, and healthcare executives called the Relationship Regulator. It's a mini course that will show you step by step a framework that may serve you very powerfully in this area. So if you want to download the Relationship Regulator for free, click in the show notes and you'll find that resource for you today. Now, back to the show. I'm wondering, how did you develop that capacity? Like, if you go back to the beginning, I know for me, when I look at being an early manager, early leader, even a supervisor, and then working into an executive role, there was, I mean, it's an ongoing practice of really developing the skill. I think for me was to be present. Like to be present was a really difficult one for me to have, because I had so much going on in my head. I've got a phone that's texting me. I've got emails that are coming in. I've got an agenda that I've got to get done. I've got 4 projects that are in my mind. And then an employee comes up and wants to ask a question and talk to me. And that used to be really hard for me. Like, I had a really difficult time, like, letting it all go and just being present. So for me, that was one skill that I know that really has developed over the years and still is developing. What are some skills, like, if you could talk to the younger, earlier version of you that's first starting, like a couple of decades ago, what are some of the things you would tell them to pay attention to? And what are a couple of things that you would tell them to just don't worry about that?
Okay. Curiosity probably be the biggest one, is
Yeah.
lean in to curiosity. That it's easy to rely on what you know and say, I've got it, right? I know this, I can show up with what I know.
Mhm.
And I think that that's seems to be a more reactionary place for a lot of young leaders and senior leaders. Just I'm going to show up with what I know versus showing up with that curiosity. And
Mhm.
so the more I've leaned into the curiosity of myself, like, why am I experiencing this? So what am I experiencing? You talked a little bit about the reactivity. So I've got a trigger, something's happening for me. I'm feeling it. I'm the rage or even the pleasure, like I'm feeling something strong. Why am
Mhm.
I resonating with this in a positive or challenging way? Why is it feeling hard for me in this moment? And sometimes it's about the other person. Sometimes it's that the other person has said something intentionally to kind of get my goat.
Mhm.
Uh, or sometimes they're just having a difficult moment, and what they're saying is I'm feeling impacted by what they're saying or what they're going through. And sometimes it's all on me, like nothing to do with anybody else at all. I'm just finding myself feeling something strong. So that's one piece, the curiosity. The tool that I think has been incredibly helpful is leaning into difficult conversations.
Mhm.
And it's an underrated, know what I'm trying to say? Underrated. I think we don't give credit to leaning into difficult situations and difficult conversations. And as a leader, it's almost the entire job is leaning
Mhm.
into difficult conversations. Really, it's so, and not just a big conflict, but like a difficult decision. We have to make tough calls, or we just have to make a decision, period. And that requires us to look at what we want and what we don't want, to sometimes face those difficult realities of, I want this, but I can't achieve that. I don't have all of that in order to do exactly what I want to do. So where's the compromise? So
Mhm.
leaning into difficult or challenging, or curious, there's all sorts of language out there to shape the fact that we have to face a situation where it requires some complex thought, some critical thinking, and perhaps a difficult conversation or a curious conversation with someone else. But through that exercise, I've learned so much about myself. I've
Mhm.
learned so much about how to support other people and how to support myself in the process. There's an author called Gervais Bush. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. Have you heard of him? I think his book is called Clear Leadership, and he talks about a tool called the Experience Cube. Does that
Yeah.
resonate?
Yes, it does. I
Okay.
know the experience cube quite well.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Yeah, it's something Fraser Health, and I think I might have leaned
Yeah,
into
clear
hard.
leadership is a pretty big part of the culture where I'm working right now. So that it's
Oh, mhm.
definitely, and I can hear all of my colleagues in the people development department smiling right now. I
Okay.
just, I just, I just, I felt them smiling from the inside out there, because the experience cube is just such a great example of how to navigate difficult conversations, first of all within yourself and then with other people. So
Um,
yeah, please go on.
well, thanks. I'm glad it resonates. So and challenge me if you're like, oh, I have a different understanding of it. But for me, the tool is really about identifying your observations, stating your thoughts. What do you think about it? What are the stories you're making up, the judgments, all that jazz? And then how do you feel? like the big ones, mad, sad, glad, anxious, like etc. But just the true and your body sensations. What's going on for me around
Right.
how am I feeling about the situation? And then what do I want? And it's not necessarily about always about me in the moment trying to understand my own personal experience of it, but also trying to help understand someone else's experience of something. So as they're sharing a situation with me, I tried to think the same. What are they seeing in this moment? What are they thinking about it? What are they how are they feeling? And what do they want? And so using that tool and others, but I would say that that was one that I was taught early in my career and I've leaned on hard, is that it's really helped me as a leader in so many situations. But through that, having a tool has given me some courage to lean into those conversations more. And through that, it's really helped me to develop as a person, number one, and as a leader. What do you think about that? How's it?
Well, I love
You feel?
that. I also there's something you brought up in what you just shared that I'd like to double click on as well. And you've kind of tapped on a misconception of what a safe space is. There's this misconception I noticed that people have, that a safe space is somewhere where you play it safe and you don't have candid conversations. And actually, I believe the opposite is true. So when you have a safe space, it's a place where you actually need to walk up to and talk about everything. It actually asks you to step out and lean in to those difficult conversations even more. And I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart, because I know that you have just done a recent TEDx talk on this and the whole idea of coming to the table. And when I look at the work that I'm doing in healthcare, this is a critical topic, because what I notice is sometimes toxicity can last for long periods of time in relationships between people. And oftentimes managers and leaders are not really certain about how to address these things. And so I'm curious, what do you have to offer us around coming to the table, and what have you learned? And maybe just a couple of things you shared in your TEDx talk that's going to be public in the next couple of months.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Trace. So backing up a bit, the clear leadership tools, the experience cube, and many others. There's all these tools around how to have the conversation, like once you're in them. And having those does tend to give you a bit of confidence for leaning in and having the conversation. But for many of us, it's not enough to know what to do once you're there, but how to move past the hesitation and the anxiety that comes often with facing those types of conversations. And so a friend of mine nominated me for a friend and colleague. She nominated me for this TEDx talk, as you mentioned. It was a real honor to be able to have the opportunity to put my name forward for that and get through the selection process to give such a talk.
Yeah,
But
congratulations. That's great that you got through the selection process. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really truly a bucket list. I don't know why, Trace, but it was a bucket list thing for me. And so I'm really excited to have done it. It was hard work, I'm telling you. Got interested in doing it, reach out, let's talk about it, because it's so worth it. But it's a lot of work. And one of the key elements of the prep process, you get a lot of coaching through the development process of putting together a TEDx talk. And a key first step was, what's your why? Like very Simon Sinek, right? What's your why? You have a topic, you've put it forward for the selection process, but then the hard work of really, why do you want to bring that forward? And so I realized that I've always had this interest in leaning into difficult conversations for all the reasons we've talked about so far. But my why was really about being that vulnerable little girl that faced the schoolyard bullies. And we've all faced the schoolyard bullies. Like, I mean, if you got through school without facing a bully, gosh, you're probably a rare person. And then to face difficult forces, whether that's a tough boss as a teenager or a tricky boss in your career, or even getting a difficult grade back that you think was unfair. Like, there's all these opportunities that you have a choice of building your self-confidence or letting it slip through your hands, like like sand, right? It's just, it can drift away quickly, and we can allow ourselves to hand over our confidence. So, or I did anyways. I found myself really working hard to maintain my confidence. Are you still with me? Like, I know I'm kind of going around.
No, it's
bear with
great.
me. And so, when I think about why it's important to me as a leader and as a person to lean into difficult conversations, it's about recognizing we have an important voice. We have an important voice, whether that's advocacy of self or advocacy of somebody else. And sometimes we are the only person in the room that can do one of those two things, or both, stand up for ourselves or stand up for someone else. And so what's it going to take? And I was very fortunate. I had parents who really supported me in having difficult conversations and standing up for myself. I always had a safe place at home, which I know not everybody does, but so fortunate to have that role modeling, that even in front of the bully, Sarah, go out and stay strong in your power. And my mom in particular, she was a nurse by background and worked in some pretty tough spots. And I watched her have difficult conversations. I watched her work through it herself before she went into the workplace and had them there. So it was quite an amazing experience to have that, to see the behind the scenes, and maybe not always be present for the in front of the position, in front of the workplace. But nonetheless, she helped. I learned a lot from her journey. And so I'm boiling it down again, linking back to that why, some of the things that I learned from her were four key steps, which I talk about in my TEDx talk. And I use the framework of a compass to help remind me of them. And so I use the compass as a tool in the TEDx talk, though, to hopefully help other people remember. It's kind of like, here's my gift to you. Please take my hard lessons and hopefully use it for some good in your own life. But when I think about a compass, I think about north, south, east, and west, the four kind of cardinal directions. And the north element is, what's the good and right thing to do? The North Star. In a situation, a tricky situation, is the good and right thing to walk away, sometimes it is. Sometimes the right thing is to walk away and not engage. Not everybody is worth our time and effort to have the difficult conversation. There are going to be times where we have to walk away. But I would say those are fewer and far between. The more often than not, it's worth it from a self preservation or self-advocacy or advocacy for someone else to actually lean in. So I ask myself, when faced with a tricky situation, what's the good and right thing to do here? That's the North Star. Next one is south. And for south, I think about support. As a leader and as a human, support of others is so important to me. I've had the benefit of some amazing support, friends, family, bosses, workmates. And when I feel supported, I feel courageous and confident. And so if I'm in a difficult situation, back to that curiosity we were talking about, it's like, what's going on for the other person? How might I support them in what they're going through? They might have the talons out and I'm the target of their frustration. Do I need to meet them there? Or can I provide some support to them so that they can find a different path through the situation that they're facing? And then the E for East is empathy. So back to the curiosity, difficult situation, I might feel self-protective. I might be focusing on myself, but if I can think about what might be going on for the other person and asking those questions to try and better understand what they're going through, lo and behold, more often than not, I'm able to see the vulnerability in the other person. And that helps me to feel more compassionate, more able to listen. And that's a good segue into the last one of West. The W for me stands for wonder. Really getting curious. When I'm locked down and focusing on myself, if I can remember wonder, shift my lens, really try and hear what's going on for the other person. Open up my ears so that I'm focusing on understanding before seeking to be understood. I really like that saying. then it shifts my approach. I can go, okay, I can lean into a difficult conversation if my focus is to better understand what's going on for the other person versus getting in there and like really letting them have it, letting them know what's going on for me, really shift gears. So if I follow that framework, the north, south, east, and west framework, it really helps fuel my confidence. It helps me fuel my courage, and better roots me into who I want to be. That less reactive and more proactive self.
Yeah, I love this. I think also there's a sense of, when you're done that process, you're probably going to feel pretty good about the fact that you've done all that you could in that situation. And then, if there's still sort of an impasse, or, you just move past that, and now it's time to move on to what's next, right? Rather than to continue to go around the same mountain, so to speak. So yeah, I love that. So looking forward to when the TEDx talk comes out. I know that you mentioned off camera before we started talking that it's going to be coming out in the next couple of months. So I'd be glad to share that link when it happens, so that we can get it out there on LinkedIn, and also make an announcement even on the podcast as well, so people can see it, because I'm looking forward to seeing it myself.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the help, because that's the whole point, right? Is the TEDx talks and TED Talks are meant to be the ideas worth spreading. And while I feel very vulnerable about it, it was my first time. Is it my best work? I don't know. But I'm very excited to.
Good for you. That's a brave
share it out
space.
there.
Yeah, I feel like Brene Brown would be proud of you, right? Like that was a brave space. I know you. I could just tell you're a Brene Brown fan. I can tell you are. Yeah.
100%. 100%.
I wonder, like, if there's, with the 4 steps that you just mentioned, and as you look at sort of healthcare in Canada, and even just in British Columbia, we have some pretty strong legislation around bullying and harassment, discriminatory harassment. Respectful workplace is something that's kind of baked into all the collective bargaining agreements, along with psychological health and safety. And we have mediated conversations and grievance processes, all of those different things. One of the things I notice, if I'm really just completely transparent, is that a lot of those oftentimes don't feel like they move us forward in kind of moving through those long-term conflicts, or those long-standing toxic relationships. And I'm wondering, with the model that you just shared, if you've had any chances to try that out as an alternative, or if there's anything that you're doing in your leadership that is sort of maybe not, going down that sort of more formal performance management and respectful workplace investigation road, but doing something a bit different. And are you discovering anything, or getting a sense of anything that would be a different approach than those sort of other ways of dealing with conflict?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's such relational work, right? Leadership, workplace period, right? Workplace culture. It's so contingent on relationships. And so we have these rules, we've got these tools, like you mentioned, the respectful workplace kind of process to go through. But if we can start with some humility and some intention of connecting, like truly connecting with the other person, understanding their heart, their mind, their why, their soul, like if we can start there from a place of curiosity and compassion, I think that we can avoid the necessity of those more formal processes. So when and it's tricky, because as a leader, we have to hold people accountable, and that can feel bad. That can not for others, for self and others. People say, "Oh gosh, like you've had to have whether it's a performance management kind of conversation, or just giving feedback." Not everybody's comfortable giving and receiving feedback. And as a leader, it is a very important role that we give feedback. And when we're giving it, I mean, we can give it in the best way, like with all the tools in the tool belt, and really nail the delivery, and it still might not land as intended. And so, so in those cases, it's like, someone might say, "Oh, I'm going to follow the respectful workplace process." The boss, the boss, they were inappropriate in giving me that feedback. And so if we can if we can catch it at the pass there, if we can say,
Mm-hmm.
hold on, let me really get to know that person. What's going on for them? What,
Right.
instead of like it just being about, I'm going to give feedback around what I'd like to see and how I want you to show up,
Mm-hmm.
and instead take it as a Trace. Tell me, who are you? Who are you as a person?
Mm-hmm.
Get to know them. One of the biggest tools I think I used as an early manager was getting to work and dropping the bag and going and rounding on units. Good
Yeah.
morning, Trace.
Yeah.
How was your weekend? How's the dog? You got married? Oh, amazing. How's your
Mm-hmm.
daughter? You're learning guitar, whatever. Like, just take a couple of minutes to. It took 10 minutes to round on 2 large units. Literally, I'm just saying good morning. And through that process, you get to know people and you develop some trust and rapport. And then people know, hold on, okay, Sarah's a good person. If she's going to have a difficult conversation with me, I have some established trust where I can probably take it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
better than if I didn't
Yeah.
know the person in the first place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we can avoid a lot of those sort of heavy processes by developing relational equity. And the bonus of that is that if you can develop that relational equity, just like you just described, it's so simple, but it's very
Mhm.
powerful and it will help you to navigate complexity, whether that's a difficult conversation, whether that's you're going shoulder to shoulder and you're short staffed and you're trying to get through that, whatever it might be. When you have relational equity that's been built up over time, it is a completely different feeling than when you don't have that. So I really appreciate that you're sharing that, that shared leadership happens in relationships. So I love that. How can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out and learn more about you and your work, Sarah? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Thanks, Trace. I think the LinkedIn is probably the social media tool I use the most. I'm
Yeah.
kind of learning a little bit about Instagram and whatnot, but LinkedIn seems to be the one where I feel I'm able to share my voice and learn from others, help people hopefully learn a little bit from me. So I think I'm the only Sarah Crawford-Bohl on LinkedIn at this time.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll
goodness.
we'll include that in the show notes too, so people can link up with you there as well. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show to share your wisdom and your experience. It was wonderful to talk with you.
Oh, Trace, such an honor. Thank you again. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, anytime. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here and listening to that interview. Please reach out to Sarah and let her know what this interview was like for you to hear. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to her on LinkedIn. Thank you for supporting the show and for amplifying a message that's positive in healthcare in British Columbia today. And remember, as you leave here and you go back into whatever you're doing, remember to be a safe space. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thank you again for getting to the end of this podcast. And if you enjoyed this and you found that there was value in it for you, my invitation is for you to subscribe for future episodes that come out weekly on Tuesdays. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to being with you next time. Now remember to be a safe space.